Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Beyond Petty podcast. I'm your host, BZ2700. Today it's going to be personal. We're going to get into the topic. Someone asked me online, how long have I been on my journey? And I decided to make an episode about it. By my journey, I mean, they were asking me, how long has it been that I've been in seek of knowledge outside of Christianity, I guess to say the least. A lot of people that I follow online are all former Christians. They all grew up under Christianity. They've been in the church either their whole life or for many years. And along the way, they started to ask questions. And when they didn't, I guess, find the answers that they were looking for, they went looking outside. I can't speak on their journey or how they reached where they at, but I know we're all going through the same thing. So instead of elaborating and giving a whole story to the person that asked me about it, I felt like I might as well make it into an episode on the podcast. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As they would call it, Deconstructing Christianity. Mine's kind of different though, because although I grew up as a Christian, I wasn't as deep off into it as a lot of other people. Like I was saying on the last episode, that I didn't come up in church like that. I went to church, here and there, but I wasn't like a every Sunday or, 3-4 times a week churchgoer. It wasn't big in my household like that, especially not early on. Now later down the line, my mother, she went pretty often. That's when she was, changing her life around and doing something different. Now, I'm sure when she was younger, she probably came up in the church to where they were going more often. But as far as I can recollect, as far as when I was younger, we didn't go like that. So I'm going to say I started, as I said, as a young age. We would go to church here and there. Never nothing too serious. I always identified as a Christian because that's what my mother identified as, and that's what I was always taught, So it's a little different for me. I've always dibbled and dabbled with the Bible and trying to get to know God and learn the Bible throughout my whole life. But I've always had questions, and it never really latched on to me like that. Like, I was in the street for a long time, so, coming up as a teenager, I spent a lot of times, running the streets, gang banging, running wild, doing what I wanted to do. And oftentimes, when I say this, I mean, like I said, in my teenage years, preteen, I used to go to church and stuff like that here and there. But as I said, I was never really dedicated to it. But it didn't probably come to me until, honestly, when I started really getting in trouble. And I started to have to sit down in jail for a while or for whatever reason. And of course, you would have the people always, bringing Bibles around or going to church. And even at that time, I would say probably when I was incarcerated in juvie or whatever, that was probably one of the first times I actually sat down and really read the Bible. Because, when you're in jail, like a lot of people, they don't start really going to religion if they didn't come up on it. But I'm going to say this. A lot of people that grow up in the street, they don't really get off into religion until something bad happens. Like you get locked up or something happened to one of your loved ones or something, or, you know, that turns us to religion more. So I was incarcerated in the Adi home, which is juvenile jail. And that's when I had time to actually sit down and think about life, read, and all that. And you do a lot of stuff to pass the time by as well. So you're not really just sitting there all day, thinking about the outside like that. So they would come around and ask who wanted to go to church. And, it was really kind of frowned upon, especially when you're in the streets and you're supposed to be tough and bad, and, you get caught going to that church and people laughing at you and looking like, but I never really cared. It was always something for me to do as well. I was able to move around and go somewhere. So I'm like, okay, well, let's go. And in jail, it's mostly like Catholic church a lot. You have a lot of Catholic stuff going on. So when they would come around and they would ask who wanted to go, I would get up and go. We'll sit around and, that's when I really started to read the Bible. And they'll give you like the little daily breads to where every day you read a passage and stuff like that out of it and pray or whatnot. And it was always, please God, help me get out of here. I'm going to change, and, we'll do all of that. That's basically how it all started. So we would do that every Saturday or whatever day they came on. And once I got out, I never continued on with going to church. I mean, like in the street. I never picked it up in the street and was really going. It still was like here and there, but it wasn't like every weekend like I was really trying to give my life to God and stuff like that. So it would always come a time when I get back incarcerated, I sit down, I read the Bible, I, go through it. And I learned more and more and more, every time though. But I wasn't dedicated to it. Once I became an adult was when I really started to have more questions about it. My wife, she's a Christian. She would go to church a lot, but we come from two different walks of life. So I would say when I became an adult is when I started to pay more attention to it and have more questions about it. But I still wasn't like into it like that. I never went to church actively. I mostly just listened to gospel music. I believe definitely, but I wasn't like an active church goer. Even when she would go to church, because she was a different denomination than what I'm used to. She grew up a Lutheran. So I wasn't with the church that she was going to. So I never really went. I think she got me to go one time and I didn't feel it, I didn't like it, so I got up out of there. And coming up, my mama had me to the point to where if a church didn't have a choir and they wasn't hooping and hollering, it wasn't no church I really wanted to go to, because that's what she was interested in. So that's what I was seeking when it would come to church. So anything that was quiet to where you couldn't really say nothing, ain't nobody singing or nothing like that, it ain't no real choir, I wasn't interested in going anyway. So fast forward to when I really started to read and pay attention to the Bible. I have a brother that's a Muslim, and he would always try to get me to read the Quran and become a Muslim. I never was with that because we always frowned upon Muslims as well as Jehovah's Witnesses, because Jehovah's Witnesses, for one, they would always come knocking at the door early in the morning on the weekend, and I know from my mom and them, don't answer that door. Like It was always like, don't answer the door. So we always knew when they would come about, nah, we ducking them. So I never really knew why, but we just ducked them. As far as Muslims went, they always frowned upon Muslims as well. Now look at him, he a Muslim, or, you know, we ain't with that Muslim stuff, get from over here. And we talk about them eating bean pies and, you know, wearing the bow ties. And it was different types of Muslims, but most of the Muslims that we come up around was the Farrakhan Muslims, because we had like mosques right up the street from us. So we would see them out all the time in the suits and the bow ties with the final calls and selling stuff along the highways and stuff like that. So it just seemed like something that we went into. Like, we didn't grow up, you know, under that, so it was kind of funny and frowned upon. When I started to actually give it a chance and want to read the Quran, it just wasn't grabbing me. Like, it was kind of confusing, and then it was like, it wasn't what I was used to with the Bible. So with reading the Bible, it was kind of different. I ain't gonna say fell back from it, but I wasn't on it as much. Now, I started having questions. Well, I started seeing a lot of stuff online, and I don't know how it came across my desk or how it was brought to my attention, but a lot of the stuff I would see online, it always had me having questions. So, with my wife being a Christian, I would ask her certain questions. And when I would ask her questions, it was kind of like, well, you got to read the Bible. You got to read. You know, it was never really, she didn't really have the answers. And the answers that she did have, it was more so what she was told versus what's in Scripture. So I started reading the Bible more. And now that I'm reading it, now I'm reading to actually learn the Bible and get closer to God. I remember in particular, I came across a part where it said, slaves, obey your slave master as you would God. And I'm like, huh? So that part, like, it's something I felt inside of me. It was like, what? Slaves obey your slave master the same way you would God. Like, that don't seem right to me. And I'm asking her, did you know the Bible talked about slaves obeying your slave master and all that stuff? And she was like, well, it was slaves back then. And I'm like, when? She's like, well, you had servants. And I'm like, okay, a servant and a slave is different though. It's not the same. Not like how, you know, what we know as slavery. So she tried to justify it and, you know, clean it up and the best way I guess she could at the time. But it stuck with me and I'm still like, nah, this don't sit right. So now I'm doing more research. I'm looking and looking. Then I find out there was a whole slave Bible. So I'm like, a slave Bible? And at that point, nah, honestly, I think it was like, what it was I was coming across different people online who was talking about these things and, you know, stuff like that. It's funny how this stuff works because when you go and you looking for something, when you asking questions, you could be Googling or stuff like that. All of a sudden, you're going to start seeing stuff, like I was saying, in different places. Like, you know, now I'm on YouTube, and on YouTube, it's people that's talking about Christianity and the Bible and, the ancient texts and books that was removed out of the Bible and stuff like that. So I came across somebody talking about a slave Bible. And in the slave Bible, I've learned that they took certain sections out of the Bible and made a slave Bible and used that to keep the slaves in line. So the slaves would be obedient to the slave masters. So once I learned that, I'm like, it ain't no way you're going to tell me that God was okay with slavery like this. So now I got more questions. Then when I found out that they took a lot of the books out of the Bible, I wanted to know why. So I went asking, man, did you know it was other books in these Bible and they took it out? And the answer I was getting was, because it didn't align with the Torah. Or Constantine did, or, it was always something to where it was kind of like justified and it was okay. Nobody had questions. It was like, that's what it is. And, it's still God's law, So that didn't sit right with me. Like, it was still like, well, why? Like, I've always been a thinker. Not only that, I've always been an overthinker. I had a question to the question, like, especially when you didn't give me no good answer. So if you can't give me an answer, I'm gonna go keep looking. And I went elsewhere and I kept looking. So the more I'm looking, the more I'm coming across. Now I'm running across these books that's been taken out of the Bible. And now I want to read these books. So as I'm reading these other books and you find out more and more, and I'm like, okay, so this probably why they took this out. Or this why they took that out. So it led me to look at it like, man, there's a lot to this right here. Then I started running across ancient texts, a lot of older texts, to where I was reading and finding out that some of the same stories and stuff that was being told in the Bible was also previously told in a lot of the ancient texts. It's just reframed in different characters and stuff like that. So I'm really like, damn. Now I'm going back and I'm thinking like I'm going back and I'm giving, her information or my brother information and stuff like this. And they kind of looking at me crazy like, why you worried about that? You know what I'm saying? Like, my brother would say, okay, now that you know this information, what good is it gonna do? How do you apply it in your life? Like, it was kind of like, okay, you found that out, but I'm cool with what I know. So nobody was interested in none of this information. It was kind of like, oh, well, we don't know if that's true or not, So I'm like, how do you know this true? And, all because of Paul and this person and that person. So now I'm doing research on Paul. And I have a whole episode that I'm going to get into with Paul and that stuff right there. But I'm not going to get deep off into it right now. But I learned that Paul was someone who hated Jesus and hated his followers and was getting them knocked off. So I'm like, y'all keep talking about Paul. Paul said. And I'm like, how y'all running up behind Paul and what he's saying when he was one of Jesus' ops, I guess. Not necessarily like that, because from what I've, read anyway, he didn't even know Jesus. He never met Jesus or nothing like that. So I didn't understand, like, how did they take his word for face value off of so-called vision that he had and whatnot. and all the things that he done. And I seen somebody say, well, he could start off a certain way, but once he seek forgiveness and he changes his life around and become a different person, all is forgiven. And I'm like, huh? That also brings me to this situation that I came across with that Amazing Grace song, which was written by the guy, I believe his name is John Newton. I'm also working on an episode about that one as well, so that's going to be coming as well. But this guy was the captain of a slave ship who basically was responsible for transporting slaves and killing a lot of slaves, and getting caught out in a storm or something like that, and was begging for God to save him, and if he saved him he would change his life. So he didn't die. I'm guessing in his mind God saved him, but then he continued on to do the same things that he was doing anyway for many years. Then down the line he decided, okay, I'm gonna change. He wrote the song Amazing Grace, and that's the number one song, in a lot of black people church and stuff like that. So, and I was on a comment with a female that was commenting about that when a guy was telling about it, and she was all like, well, I'm not gonna let you mess up a great song. The guy, he did dirt or whatever he did then, and he changed his life and repented, and now he's a different man, or he was a different man, so the song is good. And I'm like, huh? So you one of them ones that when the slave's trying to get away and run away, you like, no, I'm not gonna let you mess this up for me. Master been good for me. I'm gonna go tell on you. Like where your mind at? Like, I really don't understand. But so that's that situation. So that's what it reminded me of, like when people would say that, like, he can go murder thousands of people or whatnot, and just because you say, oh, you had a vision, okay, now Jesus came to you in a vision, now all of a sudden you want to change, so all is forgiven, come on over here now. Like stuff like that don't sit right with me. I'm from the street, so I put a lot of stuff in that terminology because that's the way I come up. We don't just forgive people like that. I mean, you could, if you want to forgive people, that's cool, but we not finna let you in, and you done did all this right here. You cool, stay over there with it, but you done did all this dirt, all this killing or whatnot. You're not finna come in and backdoor me. So I don't know how people think like, oh yeah, all is forgiven now, That just didn't sit right with me. And the more I ask questions, the more irritated people become. The more I present information to these people, the more irritated they become. It's kind of like they're set in their ways, they set in what they believe, even if you put proof and the truth right in their face. They don't want to see that. They don't care about that. That also brings me to like another street analogy. I grew up gang banging in the streets. And where I'm from, is the original, like where a lot of it started at. So when I would travel and go to different places, and I would run across other people that claim to be the same thing that I come from, when we're talking and they're telling me how knowledgeable they are, or they're moving a certain way, I would let them know, like, where you get that from? Like, that ain't what it is. This what it is, so, and they would be like, what you mean? This what it is where I come from, and this, that, and the third. And I'm like, law don't change just because of where you come from. If you this is what it is. It don't matter about where you from. It's, you know, what's law. And a lot of them you couldn't tell nothing to because this is how they grew up. They've been spending 10, 15 years or however long they've been involved in that, believing a certain thing. So it's kind of hard to get them to believe something different. They're not even open to that. They looking at you crazy and wanting to fight because you basically disrespecting them, trying to tell them that whatever it is that they believe is wrong. When you know what you know is right. So it's the same thing. Like when you talking to these people that's of different religions or whatever it is, it's kind of like it's hard to get through to them. So I'm very open-minded and I'm always seeking knowledge. So it's easy for you to open my eyes to things like that because I'm always looking to learn. A lot of people is like brainwashed and they don't want to learn, so I'm cool with what I know and what I believe in, and ain't nothing you can tell me about it. So they'll go on and have an attitude and get mad, and these are life-changing events actually, when it comes down to trying to tell somebody different than what they believe in, because now they're looking at you different, and since they can't get you on their bandwagon, they're going to get rid of you or not even want to talk to you because they're not open for more knowledge. They're looking at it like, and the first thing they're going to say is, Jesus said there's going to be many false prophets, and, the devil is a lie, and, all this other stuff to make it seem like whatever it is that you've learned from wherever you learned it from, these are people trying to deceive you, or whatnot, when none of this stuff came directly from God. This is man-made information that's been tampered with over thousands of years. Not only that, you got probably over 1,000 different denominations when it comes to Christianity. So everybody, not even only Christianity, but every other religion. You got Judaism, you got Buddhism, you got all type of stuff, Islam, you got Jehovah's Witnesses, you got all this. Like, so everybody believe that what they've been taught is the way. This is it. And if you're not following that way, you're not going to get to heaven. You're going to hell. So that's a part that I really don't understand either, because you telling me out of all y'all right? Somebody not right, Another thing is the Bible also is a collection of books over time, like in its stories. So they'll tell you certain parts of the Bible, oh, these are just parables. And I'm like, okay, what are the rest? Like, it's just crazy to me, So the more that I seek answers, the more that I actually was straying away from it because it wasn't making sense to me. Nobody can make it make sense. And like I said, there's a lot of different books and stuff that's been kept out. There's a lot of ancient texts that tell the same story, like the flood story, and everything. So once you start to see that, and once I started to see that and realize that, oh, it's more to this than what people saying, I started actually falling back from it because it just don't make sense to me. And if you can't acknowledge that none of this stuff existed before the Bible even came about, then what are we doing right here? What are we talking about? A lot of this stuff predate the Bible by thousands of years. So when you get to want to talk about, well, how do you know that's real, or this, that, and the third, how do you know what you have is real? How do you know this is real? If we're going to question one thing, we got to question all of it. So, but I know that it's more proof of the pharaohs than it is of the people in the Bible. So you take what you want from that, like, but that's pretty much my journey and how I got to where I'm at now. I feel like this is a gang, and all I say is I don't bang. I'm in the process of still seeking knowledge. I'm not Christian, I'm not Muslim, I'm not none of it. Like, I'm just in seek of knowledge. That's it. So that's my journey with the whole Christianity thing. And as I said, I mentioned before, like, I've been to Catholic churches. My brother's a Muslim, and I have different people in my family that's, different things, and they believe in different things. So I don't knock none of them for what they believe in. It's just not for me. I'm in the state to where I want to know. I don't want to believe. I want things that I know, that I can see. Not that, I have to wait till I die to figure out, Um, and I'm not going to be bullied or scared or into following something that you're not even sure about. Because these people change over the years. They'll start out one way, and then down the line, once they actually and that's another thing. It's not the message, it's the messenger. Because they will follow somebody else if they told them, well, you know what, I got it wrong. Let's say if the pastor told them, you know what, I've been guiding you wrong this whole time. I just found out this, I just found out that. And if you love that pastor enough, or you respect that pastor enough, you're going to switch over and, okay, I'll follow you wherever you go, pastor. What you saying now, what it is, Or one of their friends, somebody that they really love, or they really, feel is credible, or they respect, they'll follow. So it's not always the message, it's the messenger. So we got to pay attention to that as well. But that's it on this right there. I wanted to put that out, and I knew it was going to be a little lengthy, so I didn't want to jump in the inboxes and be like, 7 paragraphs trying to explain how I started and where I'm at right now. So that's it. This is the Beyond Petty Podcast. I'm your host, BZ2700. I'm out.